I wish I could tell you it's going to be okay, Pat. I don't know if we're coming back from this.
Hello, I'm Pat and welcome to No Stitch Unpicked. Now, marriage is a beautiful institution and I believe it deserves beautiful garments. My only question is, am I up to making them? In this video, we're going to begin finding out the answer to that question. This is the first of a series in which I'm going to be making what I hope will turn out to be my own wedding suit. Isn't that fun? We'll be starting with a jacket, and my first steps will be returning to my existing jacket pattern, which is one I drafted myself, and implementing some lingering fit corrections that I've carried over from the last project. So I've used that pattern once to make a sort of casual blazer, which I'll show you in a second, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I think the fit was, in the end, relatively accurate, but I had to do a lot of improvisational tweaks as I was going along, as I was sewing it together. And again, I think they were relatively successful. It's just that now I need to transfer those tweaks back from what I did to that particular garment onto the pattern itself that will then be the template for future garments. In addition to those, I want to also add in some other corrections because there are still some things with that jacket, the first one that I made with the pattern, that I'm not happy about and that I ideally want to eliminate going forward, or rather, correct going forward. So in this video, I will be returning to my pattern, I will be implementing these corrections, and I'll be explaining what it is I'm doing and why I'm doing it as I do it. And then we will be making a toile. Toile's got a lot of airtime in the last video, and I figured it's about time that you see what it's all about. Let's get started. So this is the jacket that I made from the pattern that I drafted myself, and this was a really fun fabric. We were lucky enough to go to Japan last year, and there's an incredible part of Tokyo called Nippori Fabric Town. There's a whole district, basically like a whole street that's just like fabric shops. Dream come true, and this was this cool yarn-dyed cotton fabric. It had this appealing tweediness, and yeah, I just thought I would make this sort of casual blazer out of it. It's a really lovely fabric. It was a bit kind of looser and frayer than I maybe expected. Again, I'm happy with the outcome. One of the problems is that I didn't reinforce it heavily enough. I also made my first sewn-in canvas for this jacket, but I didn't have any of these sort of like wool interfacing that I'm going to be using in this coming jacket. I just actually used the muslin or the calico that I used to make the toile for that jacket. I think it ultimately was just not enough reinforcement, and it allowed this already probably crinkle-prone cotton to just do what it was going to do even more. And I'll talk in a second when we look at the pattern about this sort of chest fullness issue. I think you can see that a lot already in this jacket with the way it sort of wrinkles, and I had to really scoop in and take a lot of the fullness out of the chest in order to try and just mitigate that to some extent. But ultimately I kind of hit a barrier, and otherwise you're just going to have this like, your arms coming over into your chest. The armhole is a little low, so you better believe we'll be fixing that in the toile. It's maybe a touch shorter than I wanted. It could go either way, but I think I just want that extra centimetre or two just to really even out the balance between the top of my body and the bottom. The vent is a bit too low, I think, as in where the vent starts to open out, so I'm going to raise that a little bit. I actually wanted also to lower the lapel point, as in the point where the lapel starts folding over, i.e. around where the button is, because it's currently about an inch or so above my actual sort of natural waist, i.e. essentially the level of my belly button. So I just want to lower it because I just think that's also going to help the proportions of my particular body and sort of elongating the torso because I have such long legs, and also lapels are nice and I like big lapels, so that's what we're going to do. And then the thing that really stumped me with this jacket were these sort of wrinkles around the shoulders, which I'm so helpfully pointing to. I spent ages trying to work out what this was. At first I thought it was shoulder sloping. In the end, I actually decided or realised that it was something to do with the collar and the collar line, and I sort of unpicked the collar which I'd already attached and sort of reattached it a bit further out into the shoulder line, if that makes sense. It seemed to help a little bit, but not enough in terms of what I could reasonably do having already attached the collar. If I'd really cared about it, I would have just undone everything, taken out the shoulder pads, which I'd already put in, taken out like 4 or 5 times, redone the collar and just redone everything. But at this point, I didn't really realise properly that I hadn't really sort of read up on it enough to know that it was to do with the tightness of the neckline. And as you can see, there's also this effect of the collar kind of riding up because the neckline is too tight and it kind of wants to unfold itself. So you can actually just see the bottom of the under collar, which obviously should be covered by the top collar that's folding over it. So yeah, so I'm just going to let out the neckline a centimetre or two, and that would be probably the main thing with this jacket, I think, other than the low armholes. This is also a more casual jacket anyway. I already tightened up this one a lot based on the pattern I drafted, but I think what I want to achieve is just to have one base pattern that maybe has this looseness in it, and then if I am making something from that pattern I actually want to be more fitted than the pattern itself, then I will probably just tweak it as I go in the making of the individual garment. For this particular garment that I actually want to make next, I do want it to be a more fitted cut because it's going to be a more formal suit, like a wedding, my wedding.
Pattern time. So that's the pattern block, which was the template for the pattern pieces. Just wanted to show you all these silly lines that you can see where I've marked changes. We're not going to worry about that though. We're going to focus on just the pattern pieces themselves. So they're preparing to raise the armhole, and this is me lengthening it. I ignored my own advice in the previous video and I only lengthened it in the hip area for some reason. I don't know why, I just sort of blanked, but that's what I'm doing. I'm lengthening this piece about an inch, so 2.5 centimeters, and yeah, then just sort of tapering that in. Well, there's a ton of tapering to do. And this is me taking it in around the waist and hip points, etc., just making the piece narrower. So I think I spread, let's see, I guess a couple of centimeters off of each piece there, just to again reflect the tightening up of the jacket that I did on the individual garment the last time, and I just want to carry that over to the pattern now. Yep, so that's me raising the armhole, trying to be nice and precise. I think I raised it by 3 centimeters. Again, aiming for ideally raising it probably more than I would need to, so that I can then take it away again in the toile, rather than finding that I still hadn't raised it enough. Yep, so just trimming it away. So that's the side panel done. So we'll go to the back panel. So first I'm trimming away those vent guides because I wanted to change that anyway. Lengthening again, only the hips again. Not really sure why I did that, but that's what I did. And then I'll be, again, making this back panel narrow as well as with the side panel. So taking it in at a couple of centimeters at the sides. So yeah, as you can see, the armhole's coming in quite a bit there. Yeah, I can't remember exactly how many centimeters I took out here. I think it was like a couple. So just marking the new armhole point there because I wanted to also just narrow the shoulder a little bit as well, because it was just still too wide in the pattern. So some proper tapering, good boy. And trimming. So here I'm also just slightly increasing the slopiness of the shoulders, which is just something that I'd marked on the block. I guess I must have known what I was doing. And now onto the front panel. Yep, that's where you want it on the camera. Again, just lengthening only at the hips, don't ask. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a gap, but I'm also tightening as with the other panels, so worked out just about right. So just taking that in on the front panel as well, and that will also mean that the pocket will be able to extend a bit further into the side panel, which will actually be more correct. So yep, here just raising the sleeve again, the armhole rather. Again, probably overdoing it. I mean, we'll see in the toile, but rather too much than too little. And so here what I'm about to do to the shoulders is I'm actually trimming away 0.5 seam allowance all across the patterns, because I want to just, yeah, get rid of that excess, and I've used it in certain places to make some of the changes I'm doing, but in this place it was just spare, so I just cut it away. Yep, so taking the armhole again and having tapered the shoulder just a little bit as well. So then I'm here just gonna, again, trim away a bit more of the excess seam allowance, and then lower the point of the lapel as I mentioned, so basically making the lapel longer only by a small amount, a centimetre or so it's not changing anything to do with the lapel roll line. It's not going to affect the collar in any meaningful way, so I don't need to worry about that. I hope. We'll see. And that's basically it, yeah. So I've lengthened them, I've tightened the pattern pieces so it'll be a bit more snug, I've corrected the shoulder width, and here I'm just marking on the pocket points again, because obviously I've taken it in at the waist, so I need to just readjust that. Great, so cutting out the toile. This is my calico, which I did not pre-wash because I'm an idiot. That meant the fabric was a bit too kind of flexible and pliable when I was ironing it, so I had to be very careful. I will recycle this fabric basically as like sewn in interfacings in other places, so I will just wash the toile before I use it again. But yeah, just pre-wash your fabrics. There's a reason to do it. Snip, snip. So that's the point at which the collar will extend out onto the top of the lapel that I'm just marking there. And that's the bottom of the lapel roll line. So the fabric is being cut on the fold. So there's 2 layers of fabric basically, and then the pattern piece on top. What I'm going to do is mark the points on the one side of the one piece. So the piece that has the pattern piece on top of it. So there, that's like the top and the bottom of the dart, for instance, and the roll line of the lapel. And in a second, I'm going to use tailor's tacks to mark it so that it's not just on this one side of one piece of fabric, but goes through to all sides of both pieces of the fabric. So you sort of sew a few loops basically on these points. So like here, like the top of the dart and then the bottom of the dart and the point at which the dart is at the widest, I'll mark that as well. And so you sew a few loops through, sort of like loose loops, and then you will open up the two pieces of fabric that you've just essentially sewn together and snip the loops in between the two pieces of fabric. And that'll mean then that these points are marked by thread on both sides of both pieces of the fabric. And now to the side panel. I was really pleased I got this all to fit on one width. I think this was a 1.5 meter width of fabric, and then again on the fold, so 75 centimeters across. Wider than my table was, which wasn't very helpful. I often actually cut fabric out on my floor, but that's not very scenic, so I decided to treat you guys. Great, so this is my French collar linen. This is a first for me. This is the quote-unquote proper fabric, I guess, for making collars. And this is, yeah, my collar piece. This is being cut without any seam allowance, except for at the back, because I'm going to cut two and then sew them together. So yeah, just adding 1 centimeter seam allowance. And that line that I drew on there is the line along which the collar will fold. So like fold over on itself. And again, that corresponds, or that's a continuation of the lapel roll line. Yeah, okay, so here I'm snipping the tailor's tacks in the middle. Now this is fun. This is the plastron. So I was whinging earlier in the video about the insufficient chest fullness and the insufficient reinforcement in the chest area of the earlier jacket I made. This panel is designed to help reinforce exactly that area. So in a sewn-in canvas, you'd have a series of layers across this sort of shape that I'm drawing out now. And again, it would just help the chest to have a bit more shape and structure. And what I would maybe recommend actually is, even if you're using fusible interfacing, maybe let's say you're fusing something onto the entirety of the front panel, maybe cut out a second piece of interfacing and fuse it on top of this chest area in this sort of shape, because again, that will help you maybe accommodate that chest fullness that a sewn-in canvas would be designed to achieve. And this panel you'll see when I sew it onto the front panel in a minute, it runs kind of from the shoulder seam down to 1 inch or 2 above the waist, and then the diagonal line is running parallel to the lapel roll line. So again, you'll see a bit more clearly where exactly it fits onto the front panel in a second. So yeah, drawing on the dart lines so that I can sew them. And that's the extra seam allowance on the lapel, because the only thing I'm attaching to the lapel is the collar piece, which again only goes as far as this lip that I'm going to leave uncut, basically. You'll see when I attach the collar in a little while. Button points, so 1.5 centimeter in from the edge and down from the lapel roll line. Yeah, and then just pressing the dart lines to sew them imminently. Here we go. Cool, so finally I'm sewing something. Just putting the darts together, so that's just helping the garment have that sort of slightly shaped in, sort of nipped in waist thing going on. Doesn't look like I'm being especially careful, but what's the worst that could happen? Yep, so just pressing that, then with the tailor's ham as well to maintain that sort of, I don't really know if it did anything, it just felt fancy. Yep, so side pieces and front panels together. I was happy to find the lengths all corresponded after my rather impulsive pattern changes. And then yeah, the back piece down to the vent point. I forgot to leave some excess fabric for the vent. Do that if you're cutting out a toile, because otherwise you won't be able to tell exactly how much the vent is or isn't pulling open. Cool, I'm obviously very proud of that. Yeah, so here I am sewing on the plastron. I don't know why I decided to do it by hand, just made me feel fancy using my basting thread. So yeah, you can see that diagonal line is just running parallel to the lapel roll line, and it just starts at the end point of the shoulder and kind of cuts in at an angle towards the collar line. And then I'll trim it around the armhole as well to match the armhole. Yeah, so you can see that it's just a bit of an overlap there. So then what I'm about to do is also hand baste first the shoulder seams together, The reason being the back panel is longer in the shoulder than the front panel by 1.5 centimeters. This is so that you can distribute this extra fabric across the seam, and it will make the shoulder line sort of curve forward ever so slightly, following the shape of the shoulder. So you do it like that, and then you press the creases out just a couple of centimeters into the seam, and the idea is you've then generated this curve, this extra ease in the back of the shoulder without having any actual wrinkles. But I don't know if anyone's spotted yet the stupid mistake I've been making the whole time. I know I certainly hadn't. We're going to the machine to stitch these together now properly. Oh no, poor Porco. Bearing his shame to the world. Look at this absolute bozo. He's got no idea what he's done. Although I think it's beginning to dawn on him. Slowly but surely. I wish I could tell you it's going to be okay, Pat. I don't know if we're coming back from this. You've sewn the wrong pieces together. But I won't make you watch me unpick and redo all of that. So we'll just carry on with the collar. So sewing the two pieces together, pressing it. I kind of sewed the pieces on the wrong way around, so I'm remarking the fold line with just some basting thread. Not really necessary, but again, it always makes me feel fancy and it looks good. So then, yeah, I will just press that line. So press the fold into the collar on the ham. And then sort of unpress it just at the edges a little bit to kind of allow for a more natural flowing fold around the back of the neck. And here I'm just marking on the stitch line so that I can know I'm sewing the collar on at the right depth, i.e. sort of the correct 1 centimeter seam allowance, because again the collar piece itself has no seam allowance for this purpose. It's just going to be exactly the size and shape it will have on the final garment. So yeah, just hand sewing this on. Took about 5 minutes, but we'll show you the condensed version. And then this will be the complete toile ready to go. Like, I have my shoulder pads, which I'll just sort of slot in while I wear it. And we'll go and have a look now, the moment of truth, at how it looks. How exciting.
Overall, I am actually really happy with this. I was tweaking a lot of things, and it could have been that one thing offset the other, but I pretty much think I've got it spot on. I mean, I say spot on, I think if a professional tailor were looking at this, they'd be throwing up all over themselves at this repulsively amateur spectacle. But for my money, you know, like, the lines are looking smoothish, you know, there's a few crinkles here and there. But I mean, let's think about the particular things that I wanted to fix. I think the width, the general fit of it is good. If anything, it could be taken in a bit more, but as I said, I think maybe I'll leave it for now and really fine-tune it when I'm putting together the actual jacket, and I can tell how that particular fabric is going to respond to hanging around my body, basically. And again, I want to keep this pattern as a sort of multi-purpose pattern for both casual and more formal things. I'm happy with the lapel height now. I've lowered that point, I've lowered the waistline point, basically, or like the button point, and it really is kind of sitting a bit more on my actual natural waist. The vent is ridiculously high. I can't remember what principle I based the height of that on. I'll be bringing that down to the level of the hip pockets. The hip pockets also feel a bit too high. I mean, the actual height of the pockets should be the same as on the other jacket. It just kind of looks a bit higher. If I were lengthening that pattern again, I would, as I recommended in the other video, distribute the lengthening between both the hip line and the waistline. But the length itself, I am happy with. It's really got that sort of 1-to-1 proportion now, the top of my body and the bottom of my body. But yeah, as I say, I think the process I used to lengthen the pattern overall was a bit skew-if. What I want to do, as I say, I want to lower the pockets, so I think I'm just going to lower the pockets themselves by maybe 1.5 centimeters, and that will obviously involve lowering the dart as well, so I'll just make sure I taper that in, but keep the widest point of the dart in the same place, and that really shouldn't affect the fit, which I'm pretty happy with. And again, the thing that I was most worried about, the collar line, the tightness around there, that looks actually pretty good. If anything, is a bit too loose, so I will pin that a little bit and just see if that fixes it. I'm pleased to see that that seems to have solved the problem. There's no issue now with the collar wanting to ride up or anything like that. And the chest as well, this fullness idea that I talked about. So as I say, I didn't actually implement any of those suggested scoopings that I'd scribbled out on my block, and I've left it as it kind of originally was, and I've also raised the armhole a lot. The armhole is too high. I'm going to take that down by 1 centimeter or so. I admit it, it's fine. But this is what I was talking about, you know, rather too much and you can cut it away than not enough and you're scuppered basically. But yeah, I think adding that sort of fake plastron situation in the toile chest area has already helped simulate what that extra structure might look like. I should be able to achieve that fullness and it won't be collapsing. Again, we'll see with the real garment fabric once I've actually put in the proper plastron on that fabric. But again, the real plastron is going to be even heftier than just this one layer of calico that I slipped on underneath. Yeah, I mean, I think the lines are pretty clean, the balance is good. There's a couple of wrinkles and crinkles still maybe around the place. I think maybe some of them are to do with the fact that the armhole is too high, so it's always catching under my armpit, and I guess maybe there's some tension there that's kind of radiating throughout the garment. I don't know if that's right. I'm just guessing. I'm just going to live with them for now. I'm pretty happy overall with how this looks. You're trying on your toile and you're going to want to pin it where the top, or if it's a 3-button, where the middle button's going to be. If you're trying to lay those two pieces on top of each other with nothing really to guide you and put in the pin as if it were a button, you are going to end up tearing your hair out. Instead, just try doing it this way. You want to kind of get the insides of the two jacket fronts to kind of just kiss each other, and you're going to stick the pin in that way, and it's just way easier to accurately have it put together, and it's still going to reflect all the things you want to reflect. Okay, yeah, so I've gone and just pinned the collar by about sort of 0.5 centimetre, so in total taking out 1 centimetre just at the back, and that seems to have fixed the added looseness, I would say. So I'm just going to taper out my back panels at the top going into the collar so that overall I'm taking out a full centimetre along that seam, and that should fix the problem. So yeah, wow, I'm really happy. And I feel super excited now to get on with the actual garment itself. So what a day, what a week, what a slog. We've fixed patterns, we've made toiles, we've analysed toiles, we've ruminated on toiles. I don't know why I keep saying we. I don't want you guys to have to take any responsibility for my mistakes or any credit for my accomplishments. Anyway, what a thrill. We're done. Let's go cut out that jacket.